Welcome back to another Web Dev Podcast episode where we help aspiring developers get jobs and junior developers grow. I brought Derek back on. We actually did an episode with him called There's a Massive Skill Gap Among New Developers, and people either loved or hated it. That video took off a little bit. And so we figured we'd do a follow-up. We have some things to say. We read all of the comments. Derek was very active in the comments, and yeah, this is creating some interesting conversation. So we're going to dive back into it today. I'll go ahead and link that video in the description. You should definitely watch it before you watch this one to get some context, but we're just going to continue on the conversation, address some of the comments, and yeah, dive into it. So we'll go ahead and just start with a quick intro. Derek, who are you and why should they care what you have to say?
My name's Derek Wood. I'm Sheriff Derek on the internet. That's my web name. I started doing web development in around 2011 seriously, and I've worked freelancing in small dev shops, bigger dev shops, contracting at like agencies, worked at some big agencies, little agencies. I've done some web development for different SaaS products, and I do like senior UX stuff now, but mostly a kind of front-end leaning web developer for the last 13 years.
All right, love it. So I'm gonna go ahead and so just to kind of sum up what I think were a couple of important points of the video. I had kind of made this assessment that employers' expectations have gone up, and I think most people can get behind that. And I think the controversial part was I had made the assessment that most aspiring developers' expectations have gone down into what they expect that they need to learn in order to actually stand out in the market for employers to want to hire them, to want to pay them money. And I feel like we've gotten a new generation of developers that there's just a huge mismatch of expectations between the employers, what they think they need to learn. And I think a root thing that I mentioned was there are a lot of people that just do not have a solid foundation. They're kind of just learning the bare minimum possible to hopefully get this unicorn of a job. And there are so many steps in between where they are just skipping over and they think it's going to help them. They think they're moving fast. And so we got a lot of interesting comments, but I'm curious because I want to go over a couple of comments, but I'm kind of curious what you had gathered from all of the comments that we got in response to kind of like just trying to encourage developers to like get a more solid foundation, like actually care about this industry.
Yeah, overall, I mean, because I read them all, and there was a lot of them actually. I read them all and responded to everyone because I do want to encourage and foster an active conversation, and I know that that's what you're doing. And so I kind of don't want to leave any stone unturned as far as where we could have a conversation as opposed to these kind of passive attacks and things like that. So the general feeling I got was that a lot of people felt pretty positive about it, actually. I mean, they're like, well, somebody's kind of got to say it. And I think that in some ways, whether it's your boss telling you need to step it up or something, sometimes just getting that out on the table is actually better than worrying. And so kind of knowing that stuff, I think people who are honest with themselves appreciate. But then there's just some other camps. There were some camps of people who I feel like maybe pick and chose some things that were said out of context and just kind of wanted to attack that. I think there's another camp of people who have probably been working really hard, maybe not working smart, and don't want to hear that. And so they're willing to kind of try to push down whatever somebody's saying. But I don't know. And, there's just a couple like little things, just personal things like who's this guy? Who cares? That sort of stuff. And I think, I think one of the other main ones was some people kind of said like, well, this is sort of like gatekeeping. Maybe we should, or some alluding to you're kind of creating this false narrative that we need to know these foundations kind of to suit your own needs or something like that. Like, and then there was another camp that's just kind of the general boot camps, like selling shovels in a gold rush type of attitude. But I mean, I think our conversation even though I was a little all over the place, what the core ideas that we were talking about are pretty clear. There's a mismatch between what people think they need to do and what you need to be able to do to the job. Like completing some courses isn't the same as being able to sit down with a client or your boss or the designer and make what they need.
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of I tried to go in and make some clear points about it, but I don't know, it all just kind of glossed over eventually. I
Yeah.
think you probably remember it better.
You were pretty engaged. And by the way, we loved your comments. This was awesome. I loved going through all of these, and I did read every single one, no matter whether you loved the episode or hated it. But I think there was kind of a sentiment of, or I guess what I gathered was there was kind of an accusation of gatekeeping. I want to be very clear. Influencers and content creators and other software engineers that are posting on social media platforms, we need to gatekeep harder. Because for some reason, you do not have like the proper line in the sand of like what you need to aim for in order to start actually being marketable. There's like bad information going out to you for some of you to like skip right over the foundations, jump right into abstractions and think like you're going to be hireable and those skills are going to transfer over into different problems, different frameworks, different libraries. It doesn't work like that. And so I like, maybe this is controversial, but I think not hiring managers. Hiring managers are the real gatekeepers. I think people like us need to actually strive to gatekeep, to bring people's standards up so they're well aware, because we're not preventing you from getting a job. We're just not. We're literally mirroring like the expectations of employers so you can actually hold yourself to a higher standard and stand out. Because when people like hear these like high expectations and like, oh, I'm gonna have to spend another 3-4 months diving back into the fundamentals, like when you hear that, if you hear gatekeeping, you're just on a path to giving up. You're going to burn out because you're going to apply for all these jobs, probably going to spam your resume out and then just burn out and quit the industry. The reality is the expectations are just higher. You're either going to meet them or you're going to drop out. Like that's my personal opinion. And so like these accusations, like I've seen this with other developers that are influencers as well, and they get these accusations of, oh, they're just gatekeeping in the industry, like they just have these high standards to become a software engineer and they just don't want to let anyone in. No, they're literally just mirroring what they know and who they know gets hired at their company. They're just basically saying exactly like the exact outline of what you need to do, what you need to know in order to get hired. So I think there's some people kind of just scared when they hear some of these higher expectations because it's very different than what they expected. But I think that's where a lot of these like accusations of gatekeeping come in. It's like, I don't think they're prepared to hear what we're saying.
Yeah, and I think that gatekeeping, the term is pretty weird. I think people just get a hold of these things, like whether it's gaslighting or gatekeeping, and it creates its own cultural meaning. I remember a while back, I mean, this is many, many years ago, but I think some of us were using gatekeeping like you're saying. Like I personally would rather teach and help and help people get into the industry who are going to go out there and make awesome stuff and who care about accessibility and who care about products and are going to, at their own company, try and make everything good, make sure everybody's being moral and people are doing the right things. I want to help those people get into the community. And at some point, this gatekeeping idea was a positive thing. And then I remember a few years back, it kind of flipped. And I was listening to a podcast with Mike Montero and a few people. And then I think it's just culturally shifted during the politics of the last 4 years or so, and to being something that's like definitely like, we're not going to let you work here because you don't look like us, or you didn't get this degree, so you're not allowed in, regardless of how much time you spent in open source software and how prolific you are and how amazing you'd be for our company. So I think this kind of gatekeeping idea definitely has nothing to do with you and me. I mean, if anything, we're saying like, come learn about design, come learn about programming. It was hard for us to get in there and we want to share everything we've learned to help you. So, I mean, that's just kind of just totally off base with what that is.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Were you still going? Okay. No, I think that's a really good way to look at it. Because like a lot of us, we want to see people succeed. It's incredibly sad. Like when I would do just one-on-ones, like I still do one-on-ones all the time. And, but I did a lot more of them in previous years. And I feel like it was just so sad to people or see people like dump a ton of money into a coding bootcamp without doing proper research. They graduate, they're 6 months in, then they finally reach out to me with their last bit of money. And, you know, like they have kids in the background, they have other responsibilities. Like it's kind of clear that, you know, they're not in this, like, they're not very financially well off. And they're like, oh, I just need to get a job like next month. And I look at their portfolio, I look at their resume, and they're, you know, she's probably 6 months off, 8 months off at least, bare minimum. And it's really hard to have these conversations with people like this that are just, they're at the end of their runway and they're at the end of their steam. They have no motivation left. And it's so sad to continue having these conversations. So it's like, this is why I'm so candid. This is why, like, quite frankly, I purposefully come off like a dick in certain statements that I say, because like, I want it to, like, I want you to remember it. And I want you to remember it now. Don't wait. Don't just brush off my feedback. Like I'm telling you, please, like dive into the foundations, care about this stuff, and do all of these strategies that you can actually do that take a lot of time to make you stand out and build your self-branding and build your network, but do it now. Because so many people listen to this type of message when they're at their rope's end, and they don't have options at that point. And like, because there are so many people, like you said, that we want to see get into the industry, but they just listen to the wrong advice for so long, and then they have extremely few options at the end. We want them to hear this now, and we want them to come to the industry, and especially the people that actually care about this industry.
Yeah, I think it's just the emotional energy sometimes when people forecast and they say, well, I heard it's going to take 6 months. I'm basically doling out all of my energy, and at the end of that 6 months there's not anymore. And so when they get told, hey, sorry, you went to this UX boot camp and you came out with these like 2 fake UX projects and you don't really know how to do the job, and you're competing against people who have years and years of experience of actually designing things, because there's boot camps for other things besides coding, right? It's the same in any kind of industry, really. But people will just see it as, oh, you're self-serving, you're trying to sell a course, you're trying to sell this, you're trying to sell that. I mean, people can think about it that way, but also people design things to be better, or because that they want to try to do something to be better, right? Certain colleges are trying to be the best college they can be. Are they like scumbags, like selling snake oil? I mean, they're just so for me, if I meet somebody, I'm like, if you start with the fundamentals, I mean, you're not like, it's not a disaster. It's not over if you went through some other boot camps and stuff, but it will create weird mental models. It will be harder to undo emotionally. You'll feel like you're further along than you are. You won't recognize the gaps, because even when I started, I mean, I think we've talked about this before, but I like didn't know a lot of things, and they were completely mysterious to me. And that's just kind of how it is. And if you're not stepped up through those a little bit, you don't get to have those aha moments. You don't get to have that, oh, wow, I can make a little tiny mini program that I can use over and over again wherever I want. Like I have confidence in understanding like the usefulness and the utility of a function, as opposed to what I did when I first started out was memorize something dot click. Sorry, something dot click. jQuery thing I could change a class. Didn't know what the dot was, didn't know that I was adding an event listener, didn't know there was a callback, didn't know what a function was, didn't know what the DOM was. I just memorized that thing and I went on fine with it. And so when I see people go through these, and I hate to just always be calling out React, I don't think it's like React's fault, but these boot camps that see, okay, React is in high demand, so we should teach React. That's the quickest way to get into the job. Like maybe that was the best idea at the time, and maybe there was that demand. But when you're in there, you start to just memorize patterns, visual patterns, like the shapes of the things you're typing. And it's just really obvious, as I'm sure you know from doing the one-on-ones, because you get in there and you're like, all right, let's build this little thing. And it's just amazing how blank some of the people can be, or where do I start? They're going back to, well, how did I do it before? Or like, could I look at my old one? So they're not really owning and getting the confidence in how to do that. They probably didn't have enough repetition. They probably didn't have enough kind of targeted exercises to prove the point. You know, why would I need something asynchronous? Do I just write await for everything? Just the build up. And so, yeah, I think it's not like, oh, you need to learn. The people will immediately say, why do I need to learn the fundamentals? What do I also have to learn binary? Do I also have to learn assembly code? When's it going to end? And I think there's something to be said for that. If you can get the job done and your job is writing no code, low code type of connections, great, good for you. But we're talking mostly about people who want to get their foot in the door in web development and in, you know, some form of crossover into software engineering, whether that be back end, maybe less connected to the front end. So maybe they don't think of themselves as like web designers, but somewhere in that like mesh of our context that we're talking about, you know, aspiring developers, junior developers, they want to get in there and they want to start building websites and adding features to applications and learning how to do things, probably like in some cases writing tests, in some cases auditing CSS files and updating systems, helping write documentation. Like there's a whole bunch of different roles on these teams. And people need to just understand that whatever it is, they need to be able to do those things. So if I was hiring somebody, I would need them to be at least teachable in a way where I could trust them to kind of show them the ropes of HTML and CSS and know that they could go complete the projects, or that they knew enough about Django or Rails or React or whatever we were using that they could build out features and understand the code base loosely. I mean, I can teach people what to do on the job. But if they're just kind of like, I only know how to make this fake dating website I made at my boot camp. And like, the only thing I remember is when we set up the auth for some reason. That was really exciting. So where's Passport.js? Can I install a Passport? And you're like, no. You need to have a problem-solving ability for me to say, hey, I don't have time to do this. I want there to be a calendar so that our users can see the dates. Right now, it's just in a list. Here's a mock-up. I'm going to have the designer go figure it out. But like, can you get the code in place so that we can move this forward in an agile way, make sure that it works on all screen sizes, and then we'll tune it up as we go and kind of test with the users. Like if somebody can't be on the team and help me with that in a junior capacity, I can't afford to pay them. And I don't think any other companies can too. Maybe the bigger the company is, there's probably a little more wiggle room. Like they're just like, we need six developers in here because we know we got stuff. We got a lot of tickets. But even then, you're going to have to get onboarded. You're going to have to understand the code base. You're going to have to take responsibility for things, and you're going to have to know a certain amount of stuff, even though you are new. And I don't think that in some of the comments, people were acting like we're asking too much for an entry-level developer. But maybe that's inflated in the way we're talking about it. I feel like I'm asking for so little, like really little. But it's just the nuance of what that little is. Like, I don't really care if you know how to like nest 30 levels of slots or some weird thing in your special UI framework. Can I count on you to look at our code syntax and our code rules and our code quality and match that and add features and be able to talk to me and get on camera and when necessary and pair through something, and that you are able to make your commits, make your PRs, be part of a team, take responsibility for getting those PRs to actually go through, not just make your tickets and then move on and just do all these little tiny things that float around. Like, are you going to take responsibility for moving this app forward and making things users actually care about? That's where the money comes from. And, we can make it a team sport. It doesn't have to be all about the money. But I need somebody who recognizes that, not someone who is very loosely said, I don't know, I was in a disaster. I thought I could get coding and coding would be the solution. And then I did a 6-month thing and now I'm at the end and like, why aren't I getting what I want? And those are the nice people. Then there's the people who are like, I got screwed. They told me I was going to get this and now I didn't. And I'm never going to code again, but I'm going to sit around and be angry about it all day and yell at everyone. Like, there's a huge spectrum. But at the end of the day, I don't know how we're missing this obvious stuff. You need to know how HTML works. Yes, we're going to be writing React maybe, but you're still writing divs in there. You're still writing headings in there. You're still looping over some stuff. You might even need to know HTML more because of that. And there are abstractions, and Vue makes it even easier. But if you're not learning how HTML works and how CSS works, how are you then going to optimize everything else going forward? I don't know. Like, is it really that much to ask for someone to learn HTML? Like, on one hand, HTML, by the way, on one hand, everyone on the internet is just like, HTML is easy. You can learn it in a day. There's a tag and a tag. Get over it. And then on the other hand, they're like, why should we have to learn it? That's asking too much. Like, pick a side, man. How about right in the middle? How about right down the middle logic? Websites are made of HTML. You should know how to use it. Like, pretty well if you want a job.
There's so much I agree with there. I'm probably going to pick just a couple of points, but that was awesome. You had mentioned this idea that people they remember patterns. And even like they kind of just will type this same thing, and then they might even just have kind of their text editor autofill the rest. And they do that every single time. And then when that's stripped from them, they're lost. Like, whoa, wait. What do I type? And then it significantly slows them down. Or they kind of just will, they'll even just start maybe with copying and pasting like old functions that they use that they think they can reuse, but they don't really know the fundamentals well enough of like what makes that function to type it from scratch or write it in a different type of implementation, because maybe that function doesn't work exactly like we need it to in this application. And so even changing the implementation of like just what's happening in that function, it just makes them kind of go blank. They're like, what do I do? What do I look up? And when you find that you are constantly just blocked by like, I don't even know what to look up, or like, I don't even know how to like overcome this. And then you start becoming dependent on like ChatGPT, or you just keep copying and pasting all of your old code that you probably copied and pasted from Stack Overflow. It's like, I feel like a lot of people just need to be, they need to struggle. They need to hurt. They need to feel some sort of like mental turmoil of like, I don't know what to do. Cool. This is an awesome opportunity. Figure it out. Like, this is like every time you hit bugs, every time you get stuck, and you actually, instead of like just getting mad at it, just like, because there are a lot of people where they'll just blank, and then they'll, instead of like actually thinking through it, they're just sitting there for 10, 20, 30 minutes, sometimes more, thinking like, I can't believe I don't know this. Why don't I know this? I need to remember this. And like, where's that thought pattern going? Like, you need to write this stuff. You need to struggle. And instead of copying, pasting, and like just remembering patterns, you need to actually struggle to grow and learn from this. You're going to look up proper documentation, a couple dozen times, and you remember it more and more and more and more and more. The more you use it, and the more you look it up, and the more you write it. And I think a lot of people, quite frankly, they're just, their mental state isn't great. Just when they encounter a problem that just actually is a big plateau for them. I've even noticed with mentoring people, a lot of people are just stuck in this like weird spiral of this repetitive thinking that they're just thinking they're becoming more anxious and like, I don't know what to do. And then it just becomes more frustrating. But that's solved by solving small problems. When you're learning fundamentals, you're solving small problems. You're at the initial foundation, the building blocks that are where you are able to grasp those and get those wins under your belt and do them over and over and over again. You just build a little bit of confidence, and then you take more building blocks and you combine them, and then you learn those concepts. But I think a lot of people, like, as soon as they hit that like roadblock, immediately it's like, you know what, I'm just going to copy and paste this, or I'm going to copy and paste this, or I'm going to allow my text editor to fill in the rest, or you know what, this isn't even that important. HTML, you know, like you can learn it in a day. I don't like, do I really need to remember it? Do I really need to care about like semantic HTML? Like who actually cares about that? And like a lot of people will skip over stuff. And I think I think partly it's because maybe they have this weird perspective that they don't need to learn this stuff. But I think a lot of it is it's a little bit difficult. It's going to take time. And then they find an excuse not to learn it. Like they combine all of that. And it's like, oh, you know what? I want to jump into the JavaScript. I want to be job ready. And I want to jump into React as quickly as possible. I'm taking way too much time with this HTML stuff. And like, I just, I don't want to waste time. I want to be efficient with my time. And what ends up happening is like, you are extremely inefficient with your time, because then you come on to a video, like there's a massive skill gap among developers, and you hear that message and you think, oh, you know what? Like, I can't learn all the stuff that you're trying to say that I should learn. This is ridiculous. It's going to take forever. And like, it's too much. You're expecting too much. And companies just need to give junior developers a chance and train them. And they need to understand that I just don't have all the time in the world to learn this stuff. Well, the problem is that you just spent all this time learning abstractions. You didn't really spend a lot of time learning what you needed to learn. And that's kind of a tough pill to swallow, but you're going to have to go back. You're going to have to go back to those foundations. So this is why, like, it's a huge recommendation, like, learn these foundations first. Spend most of your time in these foundations. Stop trying to pick up Tailwind. Stop trying to pick up these abstractions. Learn these foundations first. They will transfer over. It is much easier to ramp you up when you have solid foundations. So I think a lot of people have this perception of, when people like YouTubers and stuff will give this like kind of hard ass response. Like, listen, you got to dive deep. You really have to have some depth. You have to have a solid foundation, these fundamentals. They hear, oh, well, I got to learn these abstractions and all this foundation and keep digging deeper. It's like, no, I think part of what we're saying is like, you kind of just skipped over some of the important stuff and you spent too much energy here when it should have been here. That's what we're saying. So it feels like, oh, now you got to learn all this stuff. Well, quite frankly, a lot of you do, because you skipped over all the important stuff. And I think that's just a tough pill to swallow.
Well, it could also have to do with the terminology, like maybe just the word fundamentals is triggering or something. Because in a way, you could think about the fundamentals as, I mean, all of these languages are mostly the same. They're C-based kind of languages, and they have I probably know 5% of what JavaScript has to offer, and that's more than a lot of people. There's huge languages. A lot of times what we're learning is the abstraction of the browser API, like click events, the window. These aren't JavaScript. These are implementations that the browser has decided that use JavaScript. So under the hood, there are fundamentals like, can you write for loops? Can you see some benefits to these different patterns? While loops, do in, or whatever, for in, for of, whether, these bunch of new ones that are cool or newer. And then, I don't know, logic. I mean, these are foundational things in all programming. Luckily, we don't have to actually decide where we're going to store things in memory and for how long and allocate all those details. Sometimes people that come from learning C first or Java pick up things more quickly because they did have to go kind of the uglier, unfortunately. But it's nice because then they do learn how to allocate memory and how to do different things. And then when you come into JavaScript land, which a lot of people want to just start there because they heard it was the spot to start, then they dive right into that. And then they're like, basically all the courses should say JavaScript for people who already know how to write programs. But they just say JavaScript. So they're like, here's a variable, here's a loop, here's a this. Like, that's for someone who already knows how to program. They're not going to teach you how to program. I was just talking to some people on Reddit today. They're like, why doesn't JavaScript, the definitive guide, teach you how to program? Well, it doesn't really. It's just it's like a documentation almost book. You have to learn to program with any one of these languages separately. That's a separate mindset. And I think that's what people are skipping. They are learning to do implementation, which is sort of a repeatable task. set up things, make a component, put a component places. And a lot of people yell and are like, well, I don't need to do anything else to do my job. Okay, if that's you, great. Go for it. Use the UI frameworks, piece things together, connect Stripe. That's good. Go for it. But if you're out there trying to learn a more general thing that you can start applying to different languages that might spin off into something you don't know about, like we've mentioned, like I have Arduino type things over here. You can make you can do embedded stuff, you can do backend stuff, you can do front end stuff. So knowing the fundamentals, I guess I would say, is you don't need to know everything the language can do, but you need to gather a certain amount of confidence where you re-envision how this works. It's not a timeline where you do stuff and get a job necessarily. It's not that you can master anything. That's impossible. It's not that you're going to be good enough for your own kind of insecurities. It's not that you're going to match what is the industry expects. That we hardly even know what that is. Everywhere I've ever worked had like an incredible range of skill, and most people are just embarrassed to talk to each other about what they really know, depending on their salaries. But can you look at something and say, I want to, like, I had this experience. There were these drummers next to my music rehearsal studio, and I never knew when I could go in there because they were really loud drummers. So I was like, can I make a thing that will listen to the drums, and it will mark on a list what times of day these drums are happening? Maybe I could figure out that on Tuesday afternoons no one's there, and it would be fun just to learn how to do something with the Raspberry Pi or Arduino or something, and I have a computer in there anyway. And so how do you do that though? Like, you don't just go to a tutorial. The fundamentals are, we can store like little pieces of data, a time, whether there was a sound or not. We can put that set of little objects or dictionaries or whatever your language calls them in a list. We can loop through the list or iterate over the list and print out some kind of things, like there was a big loud noise or not. And I mean, this is almost this would have sounded incredibly impossible to me. I would have thought I've had to go to school to be some kind of amazing technical engineer or something 15 years ago. But if you think about it, those are so simple. But it's understanding how simple they are and how you're in charge of those little tiny baby talk type of things to the computer, and that it's your job to decide if a loop's going to help you. It's your job to decide what data structure. Should it be JSON? Should it be HTML? Should it be SVG? Should it be an array? Should it be an object? Should it be an associative array? Whatever it needs to be. And if you don't let that click enough that you're in charge and you get to decide how these things work, and the people who made those frameworks had to think how do those things work and then use them to build these frameworks, you're never going to have the same amount of confidence as somebody who does. And so it's not that you can't do the job, and it's not that you can't kind of like retroactively learn on the job, but it's a lot harder because you're going to build these different like conceptual models, mental models, and you're going to always be thinking convergent thinking. Like in UX world, you have these, I don't know, these silly like double diamonds, but you have the time period where you're like, let's think of all the ideas we can. No bad ideas. Think of every single terrible idea, every good idea. Just let yourself be free. And it like comes out like a big diamond, Then you go into convergent thinking time period and you decide, all right, which one of these are going to be good? Let's filter them down. Let's try them out with users. Okay. Then you go back into the divergent thinking. And these two mindsets, when people just put them on top of each other, it's like designing in the browser with HTML. You just start nudging things. You can't get out of your own kind of, I like designing in the browser, but you do scope down. You can't make big decisions. You can't get out of your head in a way. So I think with programming, you need to let yourself be like, I'm going to write this function new. I'm not going to go find my other function. It's not about finishing it. Maybe I'll write the function a little better this time. Maybe I'll learn something different about the function this time. And you're robbing yourself of that freedom and that divergent thinking time period where you are getting that repetition of saying, oh, wow, I learned about map. Maybe I could use map this time. Or maybe I could use a spread operator. That would be cool. Or I've been hearing about this immutability thing. What's the difference? So if you're not rewriting your code and rethinking it, you're not going to be growing. And if you're not going to let yourself be in that space to like relax, enjoy it. It's fun. It's like a computer game. It's if it's always about completing things and getting to the end, you're always going to be stressed out, like no matter what job you are in. Like the problems will get bigger and bigger, and you will be in the same mindset where you're always in the convergent thinking mindset. You're never going to learn, and it's going to be frustrating forever. I mean, that's what I worry about.
That I agree with all of that, and that last point's really interesting. And I'm wondering if that's part of what's contributing to a lot of frustration. Is maybe it is just because maybe it's not people that are just, because I think about, like, when I read all of the comments, I think about, why is this person so mad? Did I say something wrong? Are they misinterpreting it? Okay, but now they're mad at other people. Now they're just shitting on other people in the comments. So why are they shitting on other people? And what responses do they hate? And I kind of just wonder, like, why people choose to be miserable for so long, and every single response that they have is just, it's disingenuous. It's they're obviously miserable. And they don't really engage in the programming world in a constructive way. They don't lift other people up. They just try to bring other people down. It's kind of just like a misery loves company situation. And I wonder why. And I think I think you kind of summed it up very well at the end. It's just like, when you are constantly, like, when you approach the programming world, when you approach the software engineering world to just finish things, to complete things and be done with it, right? And I hit that finish line. That doesn't help you stand out. And you're never going to hit that finish line. And you do a lot of the wrong things, and you don't take time to explore and allow yourself to be creative and enjoy programming. And eventually, like, you just, I think, just build up a lot of misery and hate for yourself that you spend all this time, or you're not able to achieve it. And, like, you have all the wrong metrics for yourself to assess if you're even growing. And it's like, a lot of people just lock into, well, you know, I won this, I've succeeded if I got that job. It's a long ways away. You need other dopamine hits. You need other milestones to be proud of and to build your confidence. And like you said, when you're just focused on finishing and getting to that stage, you're ignoring all the other ups and downs and things that you can celebrate along the way. And no one can go from A to Z trying to become a software engineer and stick with it for that long without having these, like, intermediate, like, celebration of wins and just creativity, even, because, like, it's so freaking boring. Like, when I'll be honest, like, the one thing I love about entrepreneurship a lot more and building my own apps and, you know, working for some other company is because I like building up my own stuff, building up my own dream. Like, the idea, I know most people want this. Like, most people want this because I did a poll a long time ago, and I could do another poll. But a lot of people love the idea of financial freedom. Like, a lot of people I get want to have that financial freedom to not feel the burden of kind of a lack of money and inability to support their family. And I didn't have a lot of money growing up. I truly understand the weight on your shoulders that feels. And so I get that people want this kind of financial freedom and not be dependent on, like, a company, and hopefully they won't lay me off or anything like that. But even if you have that mindset, that mindset is, like, as an entrepreneur, you have to be creative. You have to enjoy the process, because that finish line, like, even for, like, I'll just use my example as, like, a YouTuber. If I based my happiness and my success off of the views that I got on each video, like, I would burn out. I would quit. I wouldn't even continue trying. Like, it is such a self-defeating thing to see a video that I spent so much time on and I thought was going to help people get, like, less than 1,000 views. That is, and I felt that it sucks. And so I think part of it is just, like, understanding, like, first of all, not having this like long-term goal of like, you know what, I'm just going to go on this efficient path and getting this job, but what are all the cool things that I can build? What are all the cool wins that I can feel? What are all the, and get those dopamine hits? Like, what are all the milestones that I can formulate within this entire path to make me want to continue? Because if I don't do this, whether you're trying to gain financial freedom and eventually like build your own SaaS product or your app, or whether you're trying to work for a company, like, there needs to be this creative process, and you need to stop and enjoy the process, or I guarantee you that you are going to be like, you're going to stand an extremely small chance at actually feeling successful at whatever you're trying to achieve. It just, you have to enjoy that process. And I think people need to figure out how to do that.
Yeah. A lot of people will say work is work. And you know, that's fine. I'm sure you can go play rugby or cricket or football after school, or, you know, after you do this. And I've heard some of the best programmers don't want to talk about programming. Sometimes I'll be at a barbecue and someone will say, hey, this so-and-so programs, and they're like, they don't want to talk about it. So some people can compartmentalize that. But I think it's pretty fair to say, if you're deciding to go into this career and you're new and you're learning, at least during this part, you should be excited. You should be interested. You should be problem solving. How is this going to fit into my life? How does my backstory fit into this? Why am I into problem solving? How does this medium work with me? What companies do I want to help? Do I want to do freelancing? Do I want to work for a company? Do I want to do both? Because, you know, you could make a lot of money on a Saturday if you're using your time properly. Could I, during this 2 years while I'm working for someone, build my own app? There's nothing stopping you from doing it. I know it's a big leap from just learning. I mean, I still have trouble getting my apps like through the finish line, you know, and I've been doing this for a long time. So I'm not saying that that's easy, but it shouldn't be off the table. And you can get together with a couple people. Also, you learn a lot from making the app. It doesn't mean it has to be a successful app. You make it, put it on your resume. You have that story to tell. You learn a lot from it. And I think people need to just be more creative with how they're thinking about this. Like, imagine what a really great candidate looks like. Like, someone I'm working with right now is moving from being a teacher in schools. They have a background in language. They've gone around the world teaching different languages. So they're interested in kind of teaching, sort of ed tech type of things. They're interested in languages. They're enjoying CSS and HTML and interfaces and using Vue and having like cool, like you could type in stuff and stuff happens. And how do you do that? Like, if you want to go work at Duolingo, what is Duolingo about? Well, it's got like a funny owl. It's got some little animations. It's got some like gamification. They're going to be interested in people who know many languages. Like, you know, they're going to be interested in people who have fun, kind of whimsical animations, or, you know, who are interested in the same things that they're doing. So whether that's making a bunch of code pens, practicing little animations, even using the little Duo owl or something, or like one of the things, I suggested that he read this book, and this book is the code book. But in the book, it talks about all these different ciphers throughout history and all these different like ways of obfuscating messages. But that would be fun, because then you're talking about language. So why not make a series of articles where you read the book, but then you also have a companion set of code for each of them to say, oh, this is how you could build that cipher from that one war in Scotland or whatever. I mean, so I'm not saying everyone is this creative, but I think people should try to push themselves a little more in that direction than the corporations owe me a job, I put in my time. I mean, it's your life. I don't make the rules. And so I don't see what railing against the machine in this case is going to do for you. And I think that, on the other hand, it's not so black and white. It's not like a zero-sum game here. If you learn how to write HTML and CSS, you can get a job doing that somewhere. It might not be the software engineering role you wanted to start with, but there's lots of little companies that do that. I see ads for it all the time. I know people who get jobs doing it all the time. I just saw one on the Discord, somebody asking for somebody who was doing just that role at a cool company. So it's the problem is when you learn 15% of 7 things, this isn't the right field for that. Like maybe later, if you learn like 15% of Three.js, 15% of WebGL, and 15% of AR, you might be able to use that in your agency to do some stuff. But if you're learning your foundation, you need to know the 3 or 4 different languages and how they work together, how to make a little mini server, how to make a little client app, how to see the pros and cons of both. And then you can kind of start to specialize. Like I got a job recently on the side just for fun, where they wanted somebody who just knew a lot about SVGs and was interested in accessibility. So I don't know, I actually recorded it, but within the hour I had the job. And I just made them some code pens to kind of prove that I understood what they were looking for. And they didn't know anything about me or my background. So there's lots of jobs in different situations out there, but you have to be willing to be yourself and find your connection to what you're interested in here. And it could be something as weird as like, I just love page transitions. So I'm going to like learn everything I can about how to make like the home page go and then come into the next page. You could do nothing else. You could just make 100-page transitions or something, and just talk about it with the people. Go in the Discord for the animation. Go and find your little groups like you were talking about the other day in your other video. Like find meetups. Go start meeting people who like programming now. Don't wait till you're done with your boot camp and then just show up and get everybody's LinkedIn's thinking that's all of a sudden going to just like get you a job. Go there and ask people, what are you working on? Here's what I'm working on. And you build up friendships. You're like, oh, this guy's really good at animation, or this guy's a nerd. I'm going to definitely call him when I need somebody to like clean up our databases. Like whatever it is, you'll become your own person if you let yourself be. But if your goal is to always be the person who finished the course, I mean, finishing the course doesn't mean anything. It's just time. Time went by.
Yeah. I don't think I have anything to add to that. I love that mindset. Why I guess the part that I love the most is this idea of like figuring out what you want to focus on. For example, I've been mentoring Zinka. We've been doing the dual stream. You've checked that out, and one thing she loves is animations. It's fascinating for her, and she should dive into it further, right? And she could become that developer that like companies want. And even if it's like on a consulting basis, part-time or full-time, like there are websites that have a lot of animations. And there are not a lot of front-end developers, especially that are newer, that really have built amazing animations in their personal projects, right? This is something like, if it really interests you, man, that creates such a perfect alignment with companies like that. But yeah, I love that. I want to take an extra like 15 minutes, and we're going to go over a little bit, but you had written down some stuff that I thought was interesting. You had written down some points, and you mentioned even that like you saw the video about, I think my video of like cold applications are dead for developers or something like that. But I did think you brought up some interesting points before the episode. So let's dive into that. What do you have for us?
I guess I did have one just general point which I wanted to mention, because I think that new people just in this area who are like want to get into tech, it's so blurry. Like, what is it? What do people do at these tech companies? I mean, most of us don't actually work at Facebook or Meta. And some of the people there, you'd think they were rocket scientists or something, but there's a whole team tuning up the newsletter. Like the newsletter sign up has a whole product design team devoted to it. And so sometimes the people there aren't even doing that much complicated things, and they might be junior in their abilities as well. So there's that, there's agency work, there's embedded systems, there's all sorts of interesting, strange jobs you wouldn't expect, where you suddenly get a job and you're writing in this strange language you've never heard of, and you're just making slides because they just happen to have this old system that they have. Yeah. So I've just seen people get into all sorts of jobs. And I think it's important to think about the context and what your show is about, because I think some of those comments were like, hey, you're stopping us from being software engineers, or you're keeping this or that. But I think we're talking about our specific background, our connection to web development, software engineering as it relates to the things that we've done. And that doesn't encompass everything in the whole world. And people need to remember what your channel is about and that we are assuming that context. Like we're assuming we're talking to your viewers and the people who are interested in this topic. So if somebody out there is saying, well, that's not fair because of this, we're not talking to you. Or I'm not. I'll speak for myself. And so I think that to connect to that is just like goals. Like, are people clear on their goals? And is their goal to get a job? And if their goal is to get a job, what is the goal? What do they need to do to get the job? Like they're letting their goal be too blurry. Anyway, I wrote that down. I just want to say it. But as far as cold applications go and what you're talking about, I just wanted to kind of touch on some of the things you mentioned. You were talking about like coursework versus building things kind of on your own. And I was kind of interested in what you meant by that as far as like boot camp kind of follow along kind of boot camp one. Like a lot of boot camps have the same one, like you build this camping app, or, you know, if you do a UX, everyone comes out with kind of the same product versus when you have to sit down and figure out something on your own for your first time. Is that what you meant by that?
I'm wondering what the exact statement was. Was it when I mentioned like a lot of like if all you have is like boot camp projects, it's going to be like very low value to employers? What was the exact statement?
Yeah, my notes aren't very good. But yeah, probably around that. But you know, yeah.
Essentially, like when I bring this topic up, I talk about like. Actually, let me ask you this: was it in terms of like using projects to learn, or was it in terms of like projects that stand out to employers? Does that ring a bell?
Not sure.
Okay, that's okay. I'll dive into this because I think this is important. But yeah, obviously, like, and we've touched on this, building projects is really going to reinforce a lot of the concepts. And if you're just diving into courses, you're not learning and reinforcing as much as you think you are. And I think courses are a part of the process. And I think they can be abused and you can end up in tutorial hell, right? But they can give you that initial starter, and then you need to do other stuff to be able to reinforce the concepts that you're learning. But what I see a lot is a lot of people will kind of just build these cookie cutter projects. There's no meaning behind them. They just are building a project that is probably going to reinforce what they're learning, which is good. Those are actually good projects, but those aren't valuable projects. They don't tell employers what kind of problems you like solving, what skills how you've used the skills that you've learned to solve problems that the business is going to care about. Mm-hmm. And, you know, like based on the projects that you build, especially when it's kind of like even a basic form of a project that the company that you're applying to, like they solve similar problems, their application is just more complicated, they can get a good idea of like what skills you're actually reinforcing by solving these specific problems, especially when you have software engineers that look at your projects that have a lot of years in the industry. They can kind of like understand, okay, what fundamentals made up this implementation based on this project that is solving this specific problem. And so a lot of people, and I think majority of people just have these cookie cutter projects that they're not really solving real problems. They're just, you know, it's a cat gallery website. It's just kind of like a basic hobby website. Those are good for reinforcing some fundamentals, but you know, you got to look at yourself as a professional. Like, what are you building that is going to be representative of what you can do with a company? And to even simplify it, because I think a lot of people will put these like company projects on this giant pedestal and they're so impossible to build and you could never dream of building it. And that's not always true. But what is true is that good software engineers that are able to ramp up with that code base, that are able to build meaningful features, push it out to users, make the company money, as a software engineer, you just become a really good problem solver if you're not one already. Like, you have to identify the user needs. You have to identify, like, because you're always going to have variations in implementations. You have to understand, like, hey, you know, like, we're probably going to implement these other features that are going to reuse some of this functionality. So now I need to think about how now that I understand the user's needs and the product needs, I need to think about how I can create this reusable code to accommodate that. And now I can think about the initial structure of the application that allows for scalability of creating all these reusable components and me not to get lost and other developers not to get lost in what I'm building. It's not just a bunch of spaghetti code. And so I think a lot of people need to think about these projects in like in a similar sense, but at a basic level, where like you are building a real app that people can use. It doesn't mean, and I've seen these comments like, oh, it's way harder to get an active user base. It actually isn't than getting a dev job. It's way easier to get like 5 users using your app than getting a dev job. I don't even know why people are making comments like that. But you can build things that are useful to people, right? Like talk to your friends, talk to your network. Like, hey, what would be cool to build? Think about your old industry. Like what, you've all used crappy software in your old industry. We all have, right? Like what could you build differently? What if you could build like maybe you just had this gigantic software and you needed this tiny little feature. Build that feature, right? And that's easy. You could build that feature. And that feature could be helpful to people. A lot of entire companies are founded off of these really small solutions that then grow based on user feedback. Because you got a few people and they're like, it'd be cool if it did this. This is kind of my problem. And I don't think you need to go into this like, because I've gone extensively into like long UX courses to go through this entire process to flesh out all this stuff. And I'm not great with it, but it's interesting and there's depth to it. You don't need to be a great designer. You don't need to like be amazing at UX and just identify all of your users perfectly like a professional UX or designer would. But you do need to think about, like, you need to talk to people, like push it out to your network, get their feedback, and that's enough to start fleshing out some additional features that your app can turn into. And then, if you are building something for kind of your fitness journey, or you're building something for like you're trying to learn music, or like there was one person I talked to, they're like, I can't keep track of all my notes as a developer. And I'm like, there's so much useful context. I don't know how to keep track of all of it and bring it up at the right time when I need it and create searchability and focus on that. And it's like, man, everything you're describing sounds like a really cool app that would help you out and that would help so many aspiring developers out. You have to start thinking about, when you encounter these problems, it would be cool to do this. This is frustrating. Like, use these as opportunities to build stuff in your way that solves the problem. Put it in front of a few people, get features. And now this personal project that you care about in this industry, you can start fleshing out features and it starts blowing up and blowing up and blowing up, and it's meaningful, and you're building you're using your skills to build or provide real value to people that employers care about. And then you apply to companies where like it's a similar product. Like you apply to the fitness industry, dev positions in the fitness industry, you apply in the music industry. And those are tailored projects that truly do make you stand out. I think a lot of people don't want to do this because they think that and I'll kind of just end with this, but I think a lot of people don't want to do this because they think, well, if it's too niche. Keep in mind, like a lot of what you build up in a lot of these apps can be transferable into other industries and into other code bases and stuff like that. But it shows what you're interested in, and that makes you unique. That makes you stand out. So even if you're kind of building this niche app that eventually blows up into this thing, like what it blows up to can be incredibly impressive, because then even if you're not applying to the music industry and you're also applying to other industries, which you should, like you are now having to face like, okay, you're having to face problems that real developers face. Now my code base is starting to get a little bit messy. What do I do about that? Now I'm starting to like repeat my code. I shouldn't be repeating my code, right? So like, what do I do about that? What kind of reusable things that can I create? And it's that niche thing that builds and builds and builds that can start getting you to focus a little bit on architecture, can get you to focus a little bit on efficiency. Like maybe your app just has, 1,000 different results. Do we display that on a single page? I don't want to do that. That's probably not a good user experience. So what do we do? How do we fix that? Like, I think you need to just focus on an app that you enjoy building, that solves a real problem, you put in front of people, you go through the agile process of getting that feedback, iterating, pushing out, and you have to write down requirements or you're going to get lost. Because you're going to have like a never-ending goalpost. So you want requirements. This feature is done when these requirements are met. Like, this is all professional stuff. This is all stuff professional developers deal with. This is all transferable. This all looks good. But when you kind of just keep building these cookie cutter projects and going from project to project to project, you're not really diving into the complexity, and you're not learning and growing in ways that you truly can, even as a new developer. And maybe it's because it's intimidating. I don't know. But like, I think people need to dig a little bit deeper into a real problem. And I've just seen so many cool projects fleshed out that are impressive to employers.
Yeah, I think I agree with you on all that stuff, for sure. But I made a note just to also voice what I feel like a lot of people are feeling is like, is that too much? Is that, are we forgetting what it was for the first 6 months we were doing this? Like, are we kind of, but I think you're right. And I work with some people who are just getting right into business, making practical things, even at simple levels, even if it's just like, well, if I'm going to learn about looping over these little components, I'm going to make the component something I'm interested in. So even at all levels, you can start to align this to things you're interested in. It doesn't always have to be a full CRUD app. It could be a small feature. It could just be a fake prototype little feature, just with some vanilla JavaScript, just showing how this interaction would work. It could be an article researching the problem. Maybe you just like hate this one part of Trello, and you don't want to call them out and like do one of those quick redesigns, which are kind of rude in some ways. but maybe you want to explore a new drag and drop idea, and you don't know how to do it. But maybe you could just draw it out on paper and talk about it. So I think you're totally right, but that I'm just adding in that there is a range, and that people can do that. Because like, if you go over here and you read JavaScript patterns, JavaScript this, JavaScript that. If you come in here and you start and you try to read this crazy thick Node patterns book, you're not going to learn the patterns. You're not going to know what to do with them. But like what you're saying, if you're like, okay, now I have this list of things. Now I need a detail page. Now I have this card that I use multiple places. Maybe that should be its own file. Maybe that should be its own partial at its basics. Just you will. If you take on more than you can chew, you will learn patterns. They will start emerging and those things, it's just hard. I don't know how to quantify them, but they're at least 10 times better, or hundreds possibly. Like, we don't know how our own brains are like LLMs, right? They don't know how they work. We don't know how ours work. But when I finally went back to learn this stuff, and I was like, all right, just go from the scratch, stop trying to skip ahead, which is really hard. I learned just exponentially more that I can't even explain, like how the connections were all made. But when you go through that process of building something and seeing those patterns, it's totally different than if you go through and you make a Netflix clone of like the homepage of Netflix. It is good for reinforcing like some architecture, but that architecture that's not even the hard part. It's deciding things, being comfortable in making decisions. And even now, I went through a Vue course recently that was like Vue, TypeScript, Prisma, forget the guy's name. I went through it. I don't remember anything of it. I didn't learn anything about TypeScript. I didn't learn anything about Vue. And I know a lot. I've been using Vue for a long, long time. I totally understand like but I don't know. Going through that process, if you're not making decisions, and if the course isn't made to say, here's an interesting way to use a pattern, here's like 10 different things you could try, you think up something and you use it, you're not going to remember it. You're not going to make the connections. You're just going to get through it again. And it's just going to keep happening. And I know from personal experience of trying to do it. Like I've said before, I did the Rails tutorial, came away feeling like I couldn't add a feature, didn't know what to do. Maybe I didn't maybe I didn't go all in. But for whatever it is, I just left it there. But when I went in to build something with like dead simple PHP, and the idea that I'm just going to sit here until I get this thing working, I learned 100 times more than I learned in those like 20 hours of watching this really smart guy explained it to me. And that still happens to me now, this far in like my career. So if you're in your first 6 months, your first year, it's just bite the bullet. Get through the hard part now, because every little hard thing you get through will make the next part easier. It's still going to be difficult. It's still going to you always want to push yourself 110%, but those things add up so quickly. And then in retro, like it'll just start to make sense. Things will start to make sense. You'll see, oh wow, I could use this here. Or, oh, I need to show a bunch of things on the screen. Oh, okay. Well, maybe I need to store a bunch of things in a list, and then I need to go look at each item in the list and render it to the screen. Like it's not, okay, how do I do render to screen? Where is the tutorial? Or you'll start to see all of these things as little tools. And just to add to that spectrum there, like I think a lot of people just get freaked out when people, because a lot of people parrot other people. They don't necessarily know what they're talking about, but they'll say, just go do a bunch of open source. Or they'll say, just do an app and get tons of users. But and I know you're genuine, but other people are not. Like they're just saying it because they think it's maybe they agree and they want to just keep repeating it. But I could see why people are going to be a little bit shocked from that. You can do open source. Just make your own little CSS library. Have your friend work on it with you. Get a couple people. Practice open. You don't have to go straight and dive into the metal of React or something and try to get some like PRs in there for the sake of it. You can work on smaller things, and it doesn't matter if it's a famous thing. It just matters that it's something that you got to spend time with, you got to collaborate, you got to practice. So you can do open source, and you can do things with real users that are small. So anyway, I just wanted to like help people understand that, because they may not see that we're not creating this unattainable thing, and everybody's different. Some people's idea of a big project or getting users is a series of code pens that have like a funny little quiz. That one with the bear where he click the button and the bear pops up and is like, and like clicks the button back. Like stuff like that is just, gets passed all around the web and stuff. You can get real users almost like that. There's tons of people on CodePen who just made these kind of crazy things. I forget her name right now, but the woman who made the like Huggy Panda laser CodePen, go look it up if you haven't seen it. But I remember first seeing her work on CodePen and just being like, wow, she's wild. She makes a lot of weird things. Well, she's like a celebrity now. She's like the darling of the industry for, Vue and SVG and animation. She works at all these big companies, and she's super fun. And she loves tacos. So there's lots of ways to do this. And if what you're hearing from us is, oh, they're asking me to do this unattainable, super hard thing, I can't do it, I give up. You're not seeing what we're doing here. We're trying to give you like a spectrum of options, and you got to find where you're going to fit in here. It might be helping someone else with their project. A lot of people I've met and have like long relationships now were just people who were nice on Discord. They were always helping some other people around. I tried to help them out where I could. I get them jobs. There's lots of ways to make friends and just and be a part of these things and the meetups and the hackathons and how are you using your time? Like that was my other note, I guess, is just like being effective with your time. How are you using it? You could spend 1,000 hours and have a bunch of confusions, be frustrated, probably worse off than you started. Or you could spend 1,000 hours making a website, then making a little bit more complicated of a website, then making a little bit more complicated of a website. How many websites you got now? 3. That's how I got my first job. But if you just go through a bunch of courses and make a bunch of like dead in the water React apps that are just like a graveyard of things you don't remember, that's not going to work. So you just have to take some baby steps and just be a little more honest with yourself. Then it's like this LinkedIn, you're talking about curating the feed in the LinkedIn and stuff. It shouldn't be, if it's that hard to tell people about what you're doing, you must not be doing anything. If you're not seeing blog posts that are interesting to you, if you're not seeing podcasts like this that you're interested in, that you want to share, maybe you're not thinking about anything. But, why not just say, hey, cool, I made my first website. I made my second website. Hey, I made this cool slider that changes the colors. Hey, I'm interested in this cool theme maker. I don't like LinkedIn. I don't like Microsoft. I don't like the idea that they're like monetizing education and then they're also the gatekeepers for your certificates, and that they're also taking money for when you get hired. Like, I don't like it. I don't like anything about LinkedIn. But I also think it's not a lot to ask to just start pumping things onto LinkedIn once a week that you're interested in, to tell people that you're doing stuff. Because I've heard time and time again on Reddit and all these places, I started my journey. I just started sharing what I was doing, and someone reached out and said, "Man, I've been watching all this stuff and that you've been doing, and since the beginning, and that's so inspiring." And gave you a job. These are people without backgrounds in tech, people stay-at-home moms, stuff like that, but if you don't make things and you have nothing to show and you're complaining in all of these forums saying you shouldn't have to do this, shouldn't have to do that, and I say, well, hey, let me see your portfolio, and you don't have one, you don't have anything to show for your work, you don't have any proof, you don't have any articles, there's nothing, you haven't done anything. I don't know, like what, why don't you have like one little tiny open source little project? You don't have anything you ever want to reuse? That's weird. I mean, I have one that's just like console.render so that in CodePen, I can render the console to the browser instead, so that when I embed the CodePen, it doesn't give you an option to see the console. So I made my own console on the right side. It's like this long. Could ask ChatGPT to do it for you. And then but don't. But it's like this long. It's a little tiny, tiny thing. You could have a little open source thing like that. There's just so many options. And so that doesn't mean you have to do all the options. It doesn't mean that it's unattainable. Just pick a few. Start somewhere, start small, do some things, and they will grow naturally.
Yeah, it's a really good point. I'm glad you've really called that out, because it's a tricky thing as a content creator. I've said everything throughout like all of my videos. I've said everything people need to know. But in a single video, there's a lot of missing context, right? And I think that is an important thing to identify, even like when I talk about, hey, build something that's useful, right? That alone could sound intimidating, especially when you've never built something that someone uses. But you are capable of it. And I think you need to build a bunch of small things and try things out. And I think that's going to build confidence in your capabilities to build something useful. Start small. And I think that's important. Start with whatever interests you, but build, most importantly. Don't just go through a book trying to learn this stuff. Because, and I think a lot of people overfocus on the number of projects on their portfolio, when a single really impressive project that is built over the course of a year, as you're learning all this stuff, can also be impressive. But like even one of my apps was like Twitch Analytics. When I was trying to become a developer, I used it as a portfolio project, and all I did was hook in. I just made a ping to the Twitch API, and I provided analytics in a way that they didn't. I just had kind of like an object of data, and I'm like, you know what? I could do certain calculations on these two pieces of data to provide something Twitch isn't. It was a really simple app. I think I showed. I think what I tracked was like how many people, or like how long someone would stay in your stream, because I was able to see when viewers joined and left. That's a statistic back in the day that Twitch didn't have. And honestly, it took me like a week to build that out, and I could have kept building on that. And I actually abandoned the project, which looking back, I shouldn't have. It was a really fun, cool project. But I think a lot of these things, like, maybe when you hear people like me say, like, build something that's useful and put it out in front of people, like, it isn't, I think you need to just try it. I think you need to put yourself out there, first of all, like you said, like, write an article about, like, or give your opinion and share what you've been learning, or what's exciting, or your opinion on a certain thing. Like, start small, like, build a small little tool that build reusable code that you're going to then use into your other projects, right? But I think the key thing is, like, you are fully capable of building useful stuff as a new developer. But, to your point, maybe you're not going to realize that until you build a bunch of small stuff, gain that confidence, and that's kind of the missing piece. But I think that was kind of a fair call out.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not giving you, not saying you're right, but just to help people, like you said, I think that's a good point. Like, they're not getting the context of all the other things you've said, or that I've said, and like, it's a big picture, right?
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, I mean, you gotta find something you're interested in.
You do.
Yeah, just be a coder. Like, this whole industry is going to change over time and stuff. Like, the code's going to change. A lot of the tasks that people are doing, like rewriting, like Express APIs and stuff, those things might not be there later. So try to lean over into your own little product designer mindset a little, because that's still just problem solving. And I mean, yeah, not to be doom and gloom either, but like, wouldn't it be nice if you could just be your own boss that couldn't lay yourself off? That would be cool. There's no reason why we all have to just give Jeff Bezos all the money. Like, I mean, good for him, but you could have it too. It's not, no.
Yeah, I 100% agree. Okay, cool. I feel like we fleshed out quite a bit in this episode. If people wanted to reach out to you, just shout yourself out. Where are you at?
Yep, I'm Sheriff Derek, so you should be able to find me in that way. I direct this company called Perpetual Education, which has changed a lot over the years. We're kind of a education consulting company right now, sort of shifting in many ways. So we have been helping some other companies build curriculums. We also help people kind of audit their courses. Maybe you're building a course and you want someone to take a look at it early and kind of help. And then we also have like a network of people and past students who can we used as testers to test different things. We also have internal sessions that we do. I think we're doing one starting July, one group session for our curriculum called Design for the Web. So if you're interested in that, check it out. Yeah, and just in general, we're trying to create just a more active network of like web developers who are talking to each other in person and working together and trying to just fight some of this like anonymous stuff that kind of accidentally happens on the internet. Like, how can we create a community, you know, like very much like how you kind of have this community of people who can all talk and stuff like that. Yeah, so that's what I'm doing. And, you know, I also do contracting on the side and stuff.
Okay, awesome. I'll put the links below. Let us know what you thought. I actually truly appreciate whether it was a positive, negative comment, neutral. Like, I went through every single comment. I know Derek went through every single comment. And I think the important thing is just to get this conversation happening, get it rolling. But yeah, if you have any strong opinions, leave it in the comments. We definitely love to hear it. Derek, thank you so much for coming on and doing this again.
Yeah, my pleasure.